Good evening, everybody. Everybody, just give me a one. I think I've sorted out the audio issue, so just give me a one if you can hear. Let me know if you can hear me and if you can hear the music. So just give me a one, please, in the chat, please. Thank you. Just wait for a few more people to come in before we start. Give me a one if you can hear the music and if you can hear me. Okay, Sing Joaquin, Lisha Brown, how you doing? Thank you for coming. Can you guys hear the music? I'm trying out new things, so bear with me. It's a bit late where I am, hence why it's quite dark. I was meant to be doing this tomorrow, so I just thought, let me do this today. I've got a pretty busy day tomorrow, so I thought, let me do this now. Anyway, so this is going to be discussing the Woman King film. I finally got around to seeing it. And not only did I get around to see it, I think I had the opportunity to, let me cut the music off. I had the opportunity to see it and spend a few days. I saw it on Wednesday, and when I watched it, I must say I was very I don't know, maybe I expected more, but in many ways you can only expect so much from Hollywood. And I think before I critique the film, I recognize I'm a filmmaker, but I also respect the craft of filmmaking. We're never ever going to expect Hollywood to tell us a story we're never going to expect Hollywood to tell our history. This isn't a Discovery Channel piece. This is a film that's supposed to be entertaining. A lot of people have been going around saying Hollywood doesn't even, they're not even accurate with their own stories. So you can't expect that with Africans. You know, we who, like I mentioned last week, we've seen a lot of African films that have just been, fictionalized so to the point where you can't even take it seriously anymore. But I want to just actually deal with the main history behind the film, and then I'll give you my own feedback. And what I want to try and use this, I don't know wherever time it is, evening for me. Good afternoon, by the way, Kaverse. For me, where I am, it's nighttime, so I'm doing my very, very best to stay awake after a very long day. But I want to try and give you guys some information about the time and about the period, just so that you can have some context. Please bear with me while I just get it started. I've actually done a PowerPoint. I'm going out of my way for you guys, but I also wanted to just say a big thank you. The love and the feedback has been amazing this week in particular. So I'm very, very grateful. It's not easy to do this kind of thing, but when you get feedback, it makes you feel even more and more encouraged. So let's go to the TOP. I'm gonna just deal with a couple of things that were in the movie. So first things first. All slavery at its worst is bad. Okay, I mentioned last week about chattel slavery and indentured servitude. All slavery is bad. When you take somebody's freedom away from them, it's bad. But at its worst, in all places, it's bad. Okay, let me get this music off actually. At least turn it down. Let me turn it right down. Okay. So it's bad at its worst. Okay. Now, just so you understand the context of what's going on in the world. So, 1492 is a crucial year in world history because it's the year that Portugal went from being a colonized people, essentially colonized by the Moorish people, black people, and Arabic people, but people of Islamic origin, for nearly 1,000 years in Europe. In that same year, they went from being colonized to being colonizers when Christopher Columbus's first voyage to the New World. And I brought some books today that I want you guys, because I remember last week a lot of people didn't know what I was talking about. So Christopher Columbus's diary has been republished 1,000 times. So you have to be very careful with the versions that you get. This version is an okay version, but the quotes that are mentioned in this book, Ivan Van Sertima's They Came Before Columbus, are probably the most helpful. Now, Christopher Columbus said, as man and boy, I sailed up and down the Guinea coast. He said, up and down the Guinea coast. The Guinea coast refers to what they call, the Guinea coast is what they refer to as the west coast of Africa. Okay. And when they say the Guinea coast, they're referring especially to the part which we call the slave coast, which is where you have Togo, Benin, or the Dahomey Kingdom, and the eastern part of Nigeria. Now, if you understand anything about geology, there's a current that takes you, and this is how old sailors used to operate using the sails. It used to go through the wind, by the wind. Now, there's a current that takes you from the west coast of Africa, so from the Bight of Benin, which is the area next to, I suppose where you would say Nigeria is, going towards, and then as you go all the way around to Senegal and Cape Verdean Islands, there's a current that takes you straight into the Gulf of Mexico. When we say the Gulf of Mexico, we're talking about the Caribbean islands. So it takes you into Cuba, Haiti, and then the United States, and then New Orleans. This is a geological fact. So it's not something which it's been proven even without sailboats, and it's been proven even without machine-operated ships. So people have been able to see that this is not only a fact, but this is actually how old sailors used to operate. So Christopher Columbus, as a young man, was coming to the west coast of Africa and seeing that Africans had been going. One of the things that he was noticing, so when he made his first voyage, remember that he said that when he arrived in India, in his eyes, he found that there were Africans trading in gold-tipped metal spears. He saw Africans there. Now, this is not only factual simply because of the current, but we also remember nearly 100 years earlier, the voyage of Abu Bakr, the Malian king, who was Mansa Musa's uncle, had happened. So he had already come through that same current to this part of the world. So for 100 years, at the very least, at that level, there was a trade going on between Africa and what is now called the Americas and the Caribbean. So he even wrote this down. They checked even the language, the words that were being used. The word for banana, for example, was consistent with words that were used in West Africa. So this is something that was going on. But in 1492, that voyage was significant because we were able to see him we were able to see him not only see the evidence that was there. Now, at this time, the Portuguese were the main traders on the coast. Okay, they're doing their business at Mino and so on. And then later on, they start to collaborate with the Arabs who were further north, who had been doing a trade a lot longer than that, a lot longer than the 1490s. And eventually it got from one level to another. So let me deal with the Dahomey Kingdom. The Dahomey Kingdom comes in around 1680s. And let me just show you this. This is in the film. This is in my documentary. So this is a family tree. So this is essentially the point that they're starting. Agojie is the first king. So you see the year 1650, okay? And I'm just going to pause it there. 1650. 1650 is already, you've already seen the Zanj rebellion. I said the right Zanj, excuse me. You've already seen the rebellions of enslaved people in Mexico. Gaspayanga's rebellion has already happened, 100 years earlier. So we're not even talking about what's going on in the United States of America, or what was then called the original colonies. We're talking about a very, very early stage. So I want to just go through these slides just so you could see just a couple of things. Okay, so this is what the Kingdom of Dahomey looked like at that point. Okay, this is what the Kingdom of, I don't know if you guys can see that. Kwame Olatunji, shout out to you, my brother. Thank you very much for coming in. So this is what the coast of Dahomey looked like. And this is actually coming from a book by Basil Davidson, one of the few European authors that actually wrote history authentically. So this is a book called The History of West Africa by Basil Davidson. He actually did a documentary series, which I don't know if you can find online, but was pretty good. He did that in the 1980s. And one of the most prominent writers, because the thing is with history, we have to really start looking at even the people that we don't like, but we have to look at the people who actually went there. You know, just like when you want to study ancient Egypt and you really want to try and understand what people saw and what people experienced, you don't go and rely on what scholars in the last 100 or 200 years are saying. You go to the voices that were there. You know, Herodotus, for example, wrote about what he saw. And Herodotus, there's a lot of discussion about whether he was a real person or whatever, but regardless, these are people who went there and saw things for themselves. So this is a guy called Richard Burton. Richard Burton was one of the many British that used to go along the West African coast and discuss with the kings. So he went to the Oyo, for instance. He went to the Benin Kingdom. Benin Kingdom is another one that's very prominent. Just for the sake of confusion, Dahomey, right now, the country that Dahomey has become is called Benin. But there was a kingdom called Benin in what is now central southern Nigeria. Okay, that's a separate kingdom. And I guess the Republic of Dahomey, when Dahomey became a republic after the French colonized it, they adopted the name Benin. Okay, so don't get confused. It's easy to be confused, but ignore that. I'm talking about the Benin Kingdom. So the British came, they dealt with the Calabar, Benin Kingdom, the Yoruba groups, so the Atabeokuta, Oyo, Dahomey, all along, even as far as Ashanti. Okay, so these are the people that they were dealing with. And people like this man, Richard Burton, were coming, and they were the ones that were doing most of the discussions. He's not the only one. If you go previous eras, if you want to find out books, there's a man called Gomez de Zura. He's a 15th century writer. Okay. In what was called the Age of Discovery. So as Christopher Columbus is going to the Americas, Gomez de Zura is coming to the west coast of Africa, and so on. Just the same way. You have another guy called William Bosman. He's a British man, as you can tell. He wrote a much more detailed description of the Guinea coast. I don't have a copy of that here with me, but you can look him up, William Bosman. T.B. Freeman's another one. He's one of those evangelists, those people that came with the missionary movement that were coming into Africa as slaves were going out. And so almost like taking out the human being and bringing back the doctrine, the negative doctrine that was ultimately going to control their descendants, us, right? Okay, so let me move on now. Now this is Richard Burton's description, a sketch, if you will, of what the west coast of Africa looked like in the 1850s. So if you guys look closely, you'll see the Kingdom of Dahomey. And it's very important, guys. The Kingdom of Dahomey was not an empire, okay? It was not an empire in the vein of ancient Egypt or Ouagadougou or Mali or Shanghai or Kanem Borno. It wasn't any of those large West African empires. It was just a very powerful kingdom that had a good business with the Europeans at the time. Remember how they were founded. The four people organized themselves into a society to defend themselves from the different slave-raiding kingdoms. So there's Savi Kingdom on the coast, there's the Oyo, there's the Abeokuta, and so on. And eventually all of these, they all ended up fighting each other because of the demand for enslaved African people in the New World. So Europeans were constantly doing deals. And that's one thing that I think the film was quite accurate about, the Portuguese being on the coast. And just to put it in context, the film takes place in 1824. So Dahomey Kingdom is founded essentially around the late 1600s. Okay, so if it's founded around the late 1600s, we're talking about 160 years later. If you go back, if I just quickly go back to my family tree, the period that we're talking about here, let me just move on. This is the tree this tree was in the actual documentary. Why isn't it playing? Why is it not playing? So maybe it's a preview. Anyway, I'll figure this out. But so Gezo, the guy that John Boyega plays, he's the fourth generation, or is it fifth generation of kings? He's one of the first kings after the British have abolished slavery. So there's still slavery going on, but the British, who are the main guys, have stopped it at this point. So they're not really in the business of enslaving people. In fact, what they're doing is they're doing blockades, trying to block the Portuguese, just like they were saying in the film, trying to block the Portuguese, the French, and whoever else was still doing trades. And what they were actually, they're very slick people. What they were actually doing is they were taking whoever was captured, they would take them to the few islands that they had, and they would use them as indentured servants anyway. It's just that they weren't going and actually bartering for enslaved Africans on the coast. And it's funny because, you know the story of Amistad? It takes place as the Americans, after the Americans are starting their own decline into the enslavement movement, but really it's their prominence. So the British are there. They make it seem like the British were the heroes in that film, that they've captured these few Africans and blah, blah, blah. It's based on a true story, but again, Hollywood movie, Amistad is one of those that you just, stay away from. It's one of those that it will really blur the truth if you assume that's what happened in every single scenario. So that's the West African coastline. So if you can see, if you watch my documentary as well, there's Porto Novo, okay, which is named after the city Porto in Portugal. That's another coastal kingdom that it was deeply involved in the enslavement movement. But at the time that the Dahomey kingdom, the British had stopped the slave trade, so-called slave trade, Porto Novo was mainly dealing in palm oil, I was thinking palm wine for some reason. Palm oil, which if you watch the movie The Woman King, John Boyega and Viola Davis have that walk through the palm oil plantation where Viola Davis is trying to convince him that they should go into this business rather than stay in the business of enslavement. And by the way, it wasn't just enslavement. The Dahomey Kingdom at this point, we're in the Industrial Revolution, was actually a cotton place. In fact, the British used to call it the Manchester of the South. In other words, they printed so many cotton clothing that if they had focused on that instead, who knows? You just never know. But this is another part of history that we will overlook, because the Industrial Revolution is really what's revving up the Europeans and the Western world, and this is really what took them to the next level. That have almost seen them like, if in the 1800s they were like here and we were here, the Industrial Revolution took them there. It took them there because they were able to make, you think about the cannons that they were using during that war. You imagine the cannons that they used 60 years after the film took place when they came to invade Dahomey and eventually took control of it, like your superior weapons. But anyway, let me go back to my point. So Porto Novo is there and the Kingdom of Dahomey is there. Okay, so it's a very powerful kingdom, but was surrounded by different groups doing the same thing. You see the Egba to the right, if you can see it there, Abeokuta, that's the Yoruba stronghold, Yoruba speaking stronghold. But the Oyo is also another one. Okay, so this is the difference between the coastline then versus now. Please let me know, guys, if you can see this stuff, all right? Hope you can see it. This is the difference between the two coastlines now. So you can see how at that part, it was just kind of open. And now you can see how the Berlin Conference of 1884-85 has now structured these places into countries. They had no business. And let me just go back just so you can see. Wide open areas. Because we're in the era of the city-states. So you have one great city that controls the area around it. Whereas now we have this nation-state thing, which is completely different. Okay, so that's the difference now. Now, this isn't going to be a long video, I hope. So let me just try and get straight to the point. So this is from A Mission to Glele. Richard Burton wrote a very detailed account of his visit to King Glele. King Glele is the son of John Boyega's character. So John Boyega is King Gezo. Glele is his son. Gezo ended up being, the great king. He's not the greatest. There's Agojie before him, who was is Agojie, then there's Agonglo before him as well. Agonglo is one of those who was very, very adamant that slavery is not going to happen. And then you have Behanzin later on. But Glele is the king who, really at this point, Gezo has consolidated Ouidah. That's that city where they would march the enslaved people to. If you watch my documentary, it's the ending of my documentary, that town on the coast, where they have the so-called Gate of No Return. Okay, So Gezo has gone and even conquered, he's even attacked the Oyo. And then he benefited because the Egba, the Yoruba groups, Tabiokuta, what is in Nigeria called Ogun State today, had fought the Oyo, which is also in Nigeria today. And they were embroiled in a battle, and Gezo was able, with his Amazons, the Mino, the Agojie, to defeat them and regain some control. But this is a quote from, these are some quotes that I just highlighted from his book. Which was something which, again, Richard Branson was a racist. There's no other word. Reading his book is very difficult to read. He's a racist. He was a racist at the time. They had this thing called, it'll come back to me, but there was a terminology that the white people used to use. So, yeah, the white man's burden to civilize the black. Now, it came a few years later when the colonial period started, but at this point, you could already see that they were starting to be like, oh, these people are so primitive. But he does talk about the women. And, Viola Davis, I think in her press conference, she kept saying that, all these women are depicted as ugly and so on. But I think you have to understand, just being a man, being a person, if you had women as beautiful as Tuso Mbedu, what's the other, the samurai girl in the film, the Lashana Lynch, yeah, women like that, you're not putting them as part of your army, and I know they made a joke about it in the film, but just this text here, let me read it for you in case you can't see. Gezo ordered every Dahomeyan of note in the kingdom to present his daughters, of whom the most promising were chosen, and he kept the core clear of the servile and the captive Lily, his son. Causes every girl to be brought to him before marriage. In other words, he kept the attractive women. Now, whether you choose to believe Burton's account or not, other historians have written the same thing. And this book is also good because they have some very good footnotes. This is the book by Basil Davidson. Some very good footnotes of people who wrote at the time. If you read Bosman's work, he's so complimentary about the Amazon. He's one of the few, and is it Bosman? Sorry, not Bosman. Forbes. There's a guy called Commander Forbes who wrote. He's a British naval commander. He talks so complimentary about these Amazons. So where Viola Davis was getting, where the writers of the movie were getting the information from, I don't really know. But I'll leave that to the end and give you my full feedback. So there's an image that Burton drew of the Agojie. Okay, this is not him, but he got his sketch art. He's an artist to draw that. So he spent some time there. In the same way that you see the characters, the Portuguese characters come to the coast, that was a regular thing at some point where they will come pay their respects to the king and so on, and have a good time. So they were around the Agojie, and that was something which is pretty accurate. And you can also see from Burton, if you read the top part, he talks about them. He describes them as the Mino. So this Agojie thing, I'm not really sure why they use it. They chose that rather than Mino. Mino seems to be the more acceptable one in history. But let's keep going. So this is it's another sketch. This is 1850, I think 1856. It shows the court of in Abume. Abume is the town in the hinterland, about 4 hours from Ouidah, maybe 2 or 3 hours drive from Ouidah now. In those days, God knows. And it's interesting, they make, in the movie, these women could literally run it non-stop, which is obviously Hollywood trying to do their thing. But you can see his court, and then on the right is like just what he depicted as the hierarchy of society, or rather the positions in the government. Now, African leaders, for the most part, were not despots in the sense that you saw the dictators, in the 90s, in the 1900s. There were always checks and balances. For you to sit on that stool, for the Ashanti king to sit on the stool, for the Oba of Benin to sit on a stool, there are checks and balances in the society. You can't just do whatever you want. The British in England centuries before, they were talking about the rights of men, when they wrote the Magna Carta, because those were despotic leaders. In Africa, there's just very little history of that happening on a consistent level. So let's just keep going. Now, again, if you want to deal with accounts of people at the time, there are a lot of Europeans, but there are also some Africans. I mentioned the missionary, and there are many other missionaries, but he was much later. But I mentioned this book last week, The Life of Olaudah Equiano, or Gustavus Vasa the African. This is a man who was captured in modern-day eastern Nigeria, what would be regarded as Igbo land today, at the time when the Benin Kingdom is also a very important kingdom to discuss, because of, they had 16-kilometer walls, 4 times the size of the Great Wall of China. So this is a very powerful kingdom at the time, who later got involved in the enslavement period. But he wrote about his experience being captured as an enslaved person, first being taken to what would have been called Ghana today, and then going to the West Indies, and then eventually going to England. His accounts of his society talk about. So this quote I've put here, he's talking about the women. He said, "All are taught to use these weapons, even our women and our warriors, even our women and warriors," which is a very important part also, because just like the Dahomey, the Oyo, the Egba, the Ashanti, somebody else I was thinking about, they all had women, a core of women around the king. Women, last line of defense. The movie makes you think that it is only women that fought in the battles. They make it seem as though the only army was the women. And that's one thing which I find very suspect about the film, in addition to other things about the hierarchy in the society. But again, I will come back to that at the very end. But this is just to show you that whole practice of women fighters, it definitely happened. Not that we needed proof, but it was a consistent thing across the continent. Now, Olaudah Equiano also writes about his account of being enslaved. Last week, I talked about the difference between chattel slavery and indentured servitude, but specifically the difference between slavery in the Americas versus slavery in Africa. And this is a very important quote, because he's writing about what he saw when he was captured and enslaved in what would be called Ghana today. He said, "Those prisoners which were not sold or redeemed, we kept as slaves. But how different was their condition from that of the slaves in the West Indies? With us, they do no more work than other members of the community, than even their master. Their food, clothing, and lodging were nearly the same as theirs, except that they were not permitted to eat with those who were freeborn, and there was scarcely any other difference between them than a superior degree of importance which the head of a family possesses in our state, and that authority which, as such, he exercises over every part of the household. Some of these slaves have even slaves under them as their own property and for their own use." Now, Olaudah Equiano is giving you an idea of a form of slavery that you just don't experience in the Americas. And I think the use of the word slave is what gets people hyped. The use of the word slave. Sometimes if you go to Africa today, we have this thing called houseboy. The term is an offshoot of the British colonial system. They call the boys, the people that go work in the house. And there was a place called the boys' quarters. It's a place outside the house that the housekeeper lives. The housekeeper essentially is educated by the family. He doesn't go to the same school as the children, but they send him to school. He's maybe treated a little bit harsher, but he's still looked at as a human being. That is a common thing in Nigeria now. Most families have a houseboy or a house girl. What Olaudah Equiano is describing is more of a houseboy, house girl culture, which is still prevalent in Africa today. But the word slave, and this is why we have to really start thinking about the language we use. The word slave ends up being used instead, and it denotes a certain thing because of what's happening in the Americas. Because even in the Caribbean where you had less of, in the parts of the Caribbean where you had less of a plantation culture and you had more of a ranching culture, horses, the enslaved African, the mulatto, and the whites were not the same level, but they weren't treated sadly like you had in plantations in the Americas and in the Caribbean. Because quite simply, when you're on a horse, just even the dignity of being high up on a horse, but also what contributed to the revolutions that happened there. Revolutions that happened in Cuba, Dominican Republic, my God, what's this guy in oh my Lord, it's very late, guys. My mind is vanishing. The Jose Marti revolutions of Latin America. Okay, so Onuora has given us a very clear experience of himself, of what he and his sister went through as slaves. And keep in mind, we're talking about the 1700s. He's writing this in the 1700s. Okay, his book was well published in the UK, in London rather, when he got back. It was a very, very popular book. And it's one of the things that went into the Negro, not the Negro, but one of the things that went towards the abolition. Those Quakers, he got in line with those Quakers. The Quakers are the people who were religious and said, oh, we should stop this slavery thing, and so on, right? Okay, so that's what I wanted to just give you in a nutshell about the history surrounding the film and just a few things that they did right. Now, my major concern in the film was, aside from the accents, because the accents, if I don't know if you guys watch Nollywood movies. Bobby writes, Adukbel, Eshego. If you watch Nollywood movies, there's Nollywood movies and Nigerian movies. Nigeria's got a very popular film industry. Unfortunately, we're not at the level of Hollywood, and certainly we're not even. But unfortunately, we're not really trying to focus on our culture. We tend to try and focus on Eurocentric stories, but set in the cities of our country. So we're not really trying very hard to do anything deep. But the Woman King film is aside from the fact that the accents are not great, I think they were stuck between genres. If you want to juxtapose The Woman King with other white movies, you would have to put it against movies like Troy 300. If you compare Troy 300 and then The Woman King, which is basically a female version and a black version of those films, you'll say, you know what, they got the fight sequences good and so on. But even with Troy, and I know they didn't have a great budget, but the overall genre of the film was not clearly defined. Viola Davis was fantastic. I'm sorry, she was fantastic. The young girl was okay. I think she was pretty good. But I think her character was, as much as she had more of a storyline, I think her character was more just constantly operating on anger to me. So maybe that part was a little bit confusing. But the major concern for me was the person that was next to the king. They almost depicted the king and his guide. I don't know if you remember the guy with the purple outfit. Almost a very effeminate guy, very like, you know what I mean, right? And it's just not accurate, I don't believe. To have somebody, because even Gizio ended up becoming very, his wife his first wife, his main wife would tell him off, shout at him in front of everybody. These are things which, look, I know we're in 2022, and I know there's a certain element of, that's not right. But certainly when you go back to that period, we're talking about 200 years ago. 200 years ago. It's clearly just putting the agenda of 2022, this women's empowerment thing, and pushing it on a story just to try and get to try and give off some type of message, just like that effeminate aid of the king. Now, if you watch, even Henry Louis Gates did a documentary on Dahomey in the 90s, mid like 94, 95. He went to Benin Republic and did one on Abome. And even then, of course, this isn't the same line of kings, but the king of Abome talks through a mouthpiece because he's supposed to breathe a different air. So he doesn't actually speak. Somebody else speaks for him. If you see, even when I go to Porto Novo, the kingdom of, when I go to see Hosupwele, the king of Porto Novo, he speaks to me, but I ask the question to the guide, and the guide asks him the question. It's like that everywhere. I also went to the Emir of Kano. That's even in Islamic culture. The Emir of Kano, I don't speak to him directly, I speak to his aide. You go to various kingdoms across Africa, West Africa, that's how it's done. So the idea that this aide, people can just talk to the king like that. I know Viola Davis is supposed to be his general, but this effeminate guy was there for what? And that part bothered me. Other than that, though, I gave the film, I won't give it a mark, actually. I think that's unfair. It was a mammoth effort for me, because as much as I don't like the way Hollywood tells African stories in general, I don't think they respect them. I don't think they respect them with the way they cast, where they shoot. I mean, they shot this film in South Africa. Okay, I get it. South Africa is in Africa, and logistically maybe it was easier to do because South Africa is more infrastructure-wise is I guess better to do than than Dahomey, Benin Republic. But there should have been some respect paid to people. Go and shoot something, just something. And that respect wasn't given. So things like that always irritate me. Same thing with Hotel Rwanda. They shot in South Africa. Last King of Scotland shot in South Africa and partly in Uganda. They tend to do this, Hollywood, and that bothers me. But I think also language. Throughout the film, you can hear little Kosa like chants, which Kosa is Zulu, because it's shot in South Africa. The chants, again, unless you're from West Africa, you won't, I don't know, maybe you do, maybe you don't, but everybody's grown up hearing South African chants and, there's popular Lion King, all of that stuff. But when you watch the film, you start to see that these guys were really, they just grouped Africa as a country, and that bothered me. That bothered me because I felt you could feel it while you were watching it. But that notwithstanding, I think the film was a solid film. Solid in terms of it achieved what it needed to achieve. We are now we are now cognizant of the Dahomey Kingdom. Again, it wasn't an empire, and its claim to fame was because it occurred around the enslavement of African people. But I think more work needs to be done. We can't just rely on Hollywood, but we also have to rely on different pieces. And this is why I want to do these discussions a bit more, just so we can just break down some things and try and just analyze a little bit differently than the way the West would do it, and just paint it as with the same brush. Viola Davis's character kept reminding John Boyega's character Gizzo that, look, we need to stop this slave trade. It felt like a play to me. The dialogue felt like a theater play. Like everything I say, I have to say it in full. I can't be subtle with it, which is not quite what you get with a film. Movies, subtlety, quietness, even you could convey your message with. So I just wanted to just say that about the film. It's a very solid film. I think it puts Dahomey on the map, and I think more work needs to be done. But I always say this: it's so important that we all travel. I've done about 20 African countries out of 54. I cannot stress the importance of traveling Africa. And just because it's one thing for somebody like me to say this to you, it's another thing for you to go and see and feel for yourself. There's a difference. We're talking about a continent which you can fit the United States of America into probably 3 or 4 times over. Think of how big the United States is. It's not somewhere that you can just assume is over there, and once you get there, everybody's the same. It's just not. It's just not. So yeah, I want a couple more things I want to do, and then we'll round up. Yeah. So, oh yeah, another good positive about the film was the guy who played Obade, the general from Oyo. Very strong. He's from Nigeria, Nollywood actor, Nigerian film industry actor, and this was his first, I guess, non-Nollywood film, and he did a good job. I mean, it's a layup. You know, it wasn't. Again, I don't think the writing was magnificent. I'm sorry. I don't like criticizing because I'm a writer myself, but the writing wasn't magnificent. It was a message film. They were trying to say something in a Me Too world, in a world where, again, feminizing men, you know, in a world where a king is not meant to look like a king, but he's supposed to be made to look as though the women around him are the ones who give him his power, you know. And I get it, but it's not quite, it's not so simple as just to make it seem like Viola Davis's character disobeyed, fought the battle in Ouidah, took Ouidah for them. It wasn't that simple. Ouidah, again, is a coastal town. Again, the periphery of society. These are the people who you're not. These are the people who are the worst of every society. And by the way, Ouidah is not just in Benin, in Dahomey. You have Ouidah in London. You have Ouidah citizens in America. You always have those people on the periphery, those N-words, who just seem to, it's all about what I can get. You know, people. So these people of Ouidah were the ones that met the Europeans. They're the ones who would go in and do the dirty work. And that's why Ouidah kept being conquered by different people. In the film, even, the Oyo had conquered it, then Viola Davis and the Agojie went and conquered it, you know, and then later on the Egba of Ogun State, of what is now called Ogun State in Nigeria, had conquered it. So they're peripheral people. They don't organize themselves into any other society other than for business with the Europeans, you know. So sometimes we have to be careful. And this is Ivan Van Sertima's quote. He said, if you focus on the people on the periphery, it doesn't tell you enough of a story about the culture. It's too simple. And a lot of the times the Burtons of this world, Richard Burton, who I mentioned before, the Burtons of this world would go to Africa and deal with the people on the periphery of the society and be shocked when they come inland. You have to read Burton's. There's some moments where he's like, he even with all the criticism that he has to just give it up to these people at the structure of the society, you know. So again, if you focus on the periphery, you get all the, you know, the worst of society. Anyway, so yeah, guys, I'm just going to start rounding up. If you have any questions, give me some questions. Please, guys, I appreciate all the super chats. A lot of people donated to PayPal. I wanted to say a big thank you, and CashApp. Please, please, please keep them coming. This is not easy to do. If you have any questions, just ask now. If you have any contributions to the conversation, please bring them through now. So let me just read what some people are saying. Where are we? Put some music back on, actually. Okay, so Kwame, brother. Yeah, Viola Great, Galactic Soul, yeah, Viola Davis, I think was fantastic. Verse 13, they romanticize everything. Say that again. Let me take this off, by the way. They romanticize everything. They romanticize everything. I think they need to add the inclusivity for their own agenda to make the sales. Absolutely. For me, you could feel it. You could tell the era this movie was made in, you know? You could just tell the era this movie was made in. You could tell what is going on politically in the world, socially in the world, and you could tell that this movie, you know, here we have these black characters, all about the women. You know, the Dahomey women are fascinating by any stretch of the imagination, right? in fact, the term Amazon comes from like Old Greek, for like superior women, like beautiful women, but who have no breasts, right? Superior women with no breasts. In other words, women who need to use their sword arms. The breasts will interfere, so they need their arms to be free to use their swords and their weapons to fight. This is like old mythology. The women of Dahomey were far superior than the other women that fought around them, but they were not superior than the men. And that's the part which I don't know why they just kept pushing that agenda like it was, the Lashana Lynch character with the sword with the big hench guy. They don't have to use a big hench guy. First of all, physically, how are you going to find big hench guys like that at that time? Who's going out and doing a bench press of 500 pounds? It's the things where I'm just like, okay, it's Hollywood, And if you watch the Tarzan movie, which Tarzan in general is not a film which I recommend in the sense that it has any historical importance. But the recent one they made with Sam Jackson, they tried to focus around the Congo, the Belgian Congo. I say Belgian Congo, Stanley's Congo, Leopold's Congo in the 1800s, So, and in that one, they tried to do something a little bit more realistic. But again, how is Tarzan able to come to the forests and swamps of Congo and just beat up all these Africans? But that's Hollywood, That's what we expect from them. Galactic Soul. Yes, I didn't appreciate the effeminate aid. Hollywood throwing in a stereotype of black males. Galactic Soul, I don't know if you're a female or a male, but you're absolutely right. Bobby, you're right. Brother Onuora, could you educate me about King Benazir? Did he engage in trafficking of Africans, or was the trade pretty much over during his reign? Okay, so in the Dahomey Kingdom, okay. So remember, 1824 is when the film is set. 15 years, 20 years before, just under 20 years before, the British were the main dealers on the slave coast. And remember, they named everything according to what they were trading. So that part of Nigeria and Dahomey, Benin, Togo, was called the slave coast. You move towards Ghana, they called it the Gold Coast because that was what they were really trading. Next to Ghana, you had Ivory Coast, right? And then after that, you had the Sierra Leones and the Liberians, the freedom places they later became. So on the slave coast, it was pretty much wrapping up at the time of King Benazir. King Benazir, again, it's in the documentary, so please check it out. And I actually go to his old court. King Benazir was one of the last kings in the line of Gizo, John Boyega's character, in that line, that continuous line of kings from the origin. King Benazir was one of those who resisted the French. So remember, the French have stopped the trade. There's still trade going on right up until the late 1800s. So I'm talking in the late, about 1890. Because remember, even though America had freed the enslaved people, Britain had stopped slavery, France, all these places had supposedly stopped. 1884 is the Berlin Conference, right? By the 1890s, these armies are going and annexing different groups. In the northern parts of West Africa, they're using a system they called indirect rule, where they essentially manage to get the kings, they defeat them in battle, but rather than bring a whole army, they'll recruit local soldiers, and then once they defeat the army, they'll install their own king. So Benazir was one of the people who was ruling at this time. And keep in mind, Brazil is still doing trade. Cuba is still doing trade. They're still going to Cuba because of that current I talked about. They're still doing trade, So Africans are still going across, So if you just put in context, my father was born in 1935. So when his father was being born, maybe his grandfather, they would have been people that were still being captured. Okay, so maybe 2 generations ahead of me, people were still being taken. So that's just how late it happened. It was still going on to Brazil, to Cuba, and so on. So Behanzan takes place. Behanzan, they managed to get Behanzan's brother again to go and parley with the French head of state. The French head of, not the French head of state directly, but they managed to do a deal, and he manages to lure Behanzan. Behanzan is kidnapped. And Behanzan is not the only one, by the way. If you go to King Jaja of Opobo, right? King Jaja of Opobo is a king in what is the south part of Nigeria. Again, he's not the only one, but right across Africa, even all the way to not Samori Toure, to the king, all the way in Senegal. What they would do is they would take kings, and rather than make martyrs of them, because British and French, they were cognizant of what would happen if you make martyrs of these people. The people would just keep fighting. They would actually just exile them to the Virgin Islands, to Martinique, and so on. So King Behanzan, when he was captured, rather than killing him, they exiled him. First sent him to Algeria, and then they sent him to the Caribbean. In fact, there's a movie that was made in the 90s. I can't remember who's in it. It's a movie that was made about his life in exile. Behanzan's life in exile. God, what's the name of this movie now? It's made in the 90s or early 2000s, but they made a movie about Behanzan's exile. So Behanzan is the last king, and after that, they installed his brother as the king. So his brother, so if you go to Abomey today, the king that you see will be from the line of Behanzan's brother. Okay, again, the kings in Africa are figures. They're ceremonial leaders, right? They don't wield any major power. In fact, the king of Portugal, and I gotta be careful. Portugal is not the real name of the place; it's what the Portuguese named it. But I'll just accept, just for the sake of confusion. The king of Portugal. When I went to see him, we went to see him the night before to get his permission. We had to bring some money for him to accept. So these kings are figureheads. I see them out of respect for what they represent. And in fact, when I was there, it's not documented and you can't see it, but there were students, French from the French school, mostly white kids, came and they were sat there asking him questions. When it was time for them to go, they got up and left. You're supposed to take your shoes off. So some of them forgot to take their shoes off. Some of them didn't bow. I bow out of respect, but these are not kings who are powerful anymore, because the ones who were supposed to be in power were removed. If you watch my documentary Kano, where I go to northern Nigeria and talk about the Hausa kingdom, by the way, it's streaming on ushub.tv, streaming available on all Google Plus, whatever. But it will be coming back. By the way, it will be coming back to YouTube soon because the license is almost over, so it'll be available. But Kano, if you watch my documentary Kano, I talk about the Hausa Emirates. When the British came under Lord Lugard, Lord Lugard was the British man who was responsible for bringing the northern colonized part of Nigeria with the southern and making it one in 1913, I think it was. He took the different city-states of northern Nigeria, Kano, Zazzau, Daura, and all these different places, and merged them as one group. And these are people who refused to merge as one group throughout their entire history. But he merged them. So now even the political system in Nigeria, when you look at it, is so confusing. They say, the North, without knowing that the North is so diverse, But anyway, that's that. Hopefully that answers your question, my brother. Where are the other questions? Okay. Most, if not all, of the main female characters were not born on the continent. Were you annoyed by that? Ghana and Nigeria have a well-developed film industry. Look, it's a Hollywood film. I'm very, very mindful of that. I'm not, look, even when Black Panther came out, I mean, I don't romanticize these things. Like I either see it or I won't see it. Not only were they not born in Africa, but I think, again, it's what I said to you about they didn't respect the people enough to make the film a little bit more accurate. It's not the same thing as casting Denzel Washington to play Malcolm X. It's not quite the same thing, because obviously the height and skin complexion is completely different. Because the essence was there. So you don't really care whether Denzel Washington is 6'4" and light-skinned. But you do care when you're going to open this movie in front of Africans of different parts, and you're going to speak in Xhosa and do chants in Xhosa that don't, it's just an insult to people from West Africa because it's not nowhere near our dialect or language. But then to cast people who are going to do a caricature of an accent and mannerisms. You know, at times I watched the film with my wife actually. My wife is anyway. You know, my wife's account of this would be nowhere near as tame as mine. And she's, you know, so and she grew up here. You know, I grew up in Africa. You know, but it's so frustrating to watch because you're hearing what they're saying, you're looking at the mannerisms, and it just seems funny to you. You know, but again, it's not Idi Amin. You see, Forest Whitaker, for the fiction of that film, Forest Whitaker was convincing. The accent was convincing. There's a ton of imagery of Idi Amin, but what Forest Whitaker was able to do with that film was completely different. He embodied him, but he took his time. I don't believe all those other characters took their time to understand. I even read something that when Black Panther was being made, because that's the other thing, the concept of the Agojie comes from, the concept of the female fighters in Black Panther, I guess they got from that part of the world. And I think even the architecture that they were trying to use came from that part of the world of Dahomey. But I heard that Sterling K. Brown, once he got the movie, flew to Senegal, you know, just to embed himself in the culture. And I think that is cool, but I think you also have to be like, okay, where specifically in Africa is this taking place? Let me go and embody that culture. And this is why I emphasize to every single person, you have to travel the continent. The west coast of Africa is so well designed for you to travel that you can go from Lagos, Nigeria, into Benin Republic, into Togo, and into Accra, Ghana, all within a day on the West African Highway. As you're going west from Nigeria, to the left of you is the Atlantic Ocean, to the right of you is African culture. And you can drive right the way through. Togo is 30 miles long. Benin is about 80 miles wide in terms of width. From Lagos to Badagry, where the border is with Benin, is about a 3-hour drive. And then the biggest part, and then Togo and Ghana, the biggest part is once you enter Ghana, getting to the first city. There's nothing stopping you from going and experiencing this. In fact, I organized, off the back of my documentary, I helped facilitate the Sankofa journey, Sankofa journey that's run by my brother, Dr. Kambon, at the University of Ghana for African Americans and Caribbean people who are looking to just go and experience Ghana, repatriate or whatever, just to experience Africa. And we facilitated a trip for them from Ghana to Togo to Benin, just to go and see. And they went to some of the sites that they saw in the documentary. Sankofa journey is something they've been running for since the 1970s. Go on, check on abibitumi.com, abibitumi.com, which is a Black-owned, not just Black-owned, but a Black-operated social media platform also. You can only be Black to join it. What was I going to say? Yeah, so check that out. But you have to travel, and that's just that part of Africa. You can fly directly into Senegal these days from most parts of the world. Senegal is one of the few places where they made the visa process so relaxed. You know, anyone can go in. I've told the story a few years ago on a live that I did about my own experiences going there with a Nigerian passport and how I was treated badly. But you can come from America or from Europe and just walk into Senegal, essentially. You know, go and experience Senegal. Senegal, of course, you know, Senegal is Gambia as well. Gambia is in Senegal, technically. You go to Senegal, you can go to Gambia too. You can cross countries off your list very quickly when you go to West Africa, because that's essentially, if you're not from Ghana, the chances are you're taken from the area of Ghana and Senegal because of simply the sheer amount of forts that were created in that place. Go and see Gorée Island. You know, Gorée Island being where the great structure of enslavement was in Senegal. You know, so yeah, couple more questions and I'll round up. done already longer than I thought. Bobby, right? That's what my problem was with the film. Benzem fought the war with the French and not Gezo. Yeah, exactly. But I don't think they made it in the film. Gezo didn't fight the French. The war with the French comes much later. Like, he's dead at this point. It's even after Glele. Glele is before Benzem, so it's much later. I seen the Kano documentary. It was great. Thank you, my brother. Jib, JIB. John Boyega was one of the few actors from the continent in the film. Yeah, he was. I mean, the other girl next to Viola Davis, I think she's from Uganda. She's a good actress, by the way. She was really good. I forget her name though. She was from the continent. And then Obade, the guy, the villain. People say this movie is racist or we should boycott the movie, like you said in your documentary, the Sell or Be Sold. Would you say this movie was good to push us to study? I mean, most people, I've had about maybe another 100,000 hits of different pieces around this documentary in the last couple of weeks, simply because people are curious to know. You have to. You know, again, I don't like it, but Hollywood is still the premier film industry in the world. So whether we like it or not, we are still using their platform to tell the biggest stories. Until we're at that level, you know, we don't have many options, you know. So if they can tell a story like this, and, you know, even with that, like, and this is why I can't fault the filmmakers too much, because from what I understand, they weren't even given the budget that they should have had, which is what Hollywood does. So it's very hard. Again, Malcolm X in 1992 or 93 had to go and ask entertainers to fund his film simply because Warner Brothers refused to keep paying, you know, to pay for a film which they knew was under budget and knew they would go over budget, you know. So, you know, respect to the filmmakers, you know. I just, again, but to me, I don't know how they couldn't. No, let me not say what I was going to say, because I think they go with who's available for them to be to act as a director. The Dahomey did not at all think slavery or human sacrifice was wrong. They were primitive superstition societies that spoke by ritual. Look, the human sacrifice. I'm not one of these people that likes to excuse things. There's not enough history to show that they didn't sacrifice. And even just from folklore and traditional stories that you hear in Nigeria, where I grew up, you hear of small things like sacrifice right through your life. Here's the thing, is if you just leave it as they sacrifice, again, wording is crucial. How many Africans were thrown overboard? And by the way, another great book by Basil Davidson is The African Slave Trade. Depicts what was going on before and after, before Africa was enslaved by the Europeans, and then after. The sheer amount of African people thrown in the Thames just so these captains can avoid paying taxes when they arrived at the ports in London and Bristol and Liverpool. The sheer amount thrown in the Atlantic Ocean simply because they felt cargo's too much, we don't need all these people, we took too many, they might instigate this, we throw them overboard. To me, that is sacrifice. To me, that is no different. I wouldn't even say no different. To me, that is a graver form of sacrifice, because you're not even valuing the life of the human. Again, you read biblical scripture, there's a form of sacrifice that's constantly occurring, even up until Jesus Christ, right? Sacrifice is a thing of the old world that certainly happened all the time. But right now, when a government decides to press a button from a war room because they think an Islamist is somewhere in a crowd, they're not concerned with the other people that might not be Islamists, but they sacrifice all their lives in the name of their greater good. So let's be careful with wording. The sacrifice thing, we have to be careful with wording. Lugard, the Dahomey did not all think slavery was human sacrifice wrong. They were primitive superstition society. Okay, I've read that one. The way the Amazon women spoke in the movie was Western European. That's Hollywood, my brother or sister. People say this movie is racist, so we should boycott in Europe. Dahomey Kingdom. Oh, have I read that already? See Cobra Verde. Yes, Cobra Verde, a great movie from this time and place. Yep. I would rather the movie been about a legend. I'd rather the movie been about a legend or story from Dahomey than a made-up Western version. Yeah, in a way, I kind of prefer fictional stories sometimes. Werner Herzog's Cobra Verde. Yeah. I supported this movie. Viola backed it financially with her production company. I don't know if they backed it, they produced it, but money didn't come from them. That doesn't happen when you produce. They were violent in many ways in the society. It was an everyday aspect of the culture. Sacrifice to their god of commerce. Yes, that's a quote from the doc. People need to realize if you lived, say, in a headhunter society, you would be a headhunter. We are not individuals, we are our culture. And on that note, I want to say a big thank you. What's the next place you'll research? I'm going to Egypt in 2 weeks' time. Long-term documentary that we were meant to shoot during the pandemic kept getting pushed back. So, I'm now going to shoot it. Thank God. And then next year, I think is going to be a busy year for me. I have quite a few planned. But again, please, if you like what you see, support what we're doing. I'm going to try and do these more regularly. I think I want to tackle, and please let me know what you guys think I should do, but I want to actually tackle the Eastern slave trade too, because I think it's very difficult to try and understand what is going on with the transatlantic slave trade if you don't understand what is going on around the world. If you don't understand what is going on when Henry VIII separates from the Catholic Church, and you think it doesn't have an adverse effect in Africa, then you're missing the whole point, because all of these domino effects lead us to the point where we are at now. If you don't understand how the Moors being defeated at Andalusia and Granada, finally, after they colonized Africa for 100 years, after they colonized Europe for 800 years, after they re-educated Europe, after they've gone into another dark age, those things that end up happening in Africa and the Caribbean, if you don't understand that those first few Africans that were going to the Caribbean were coming off the Spanish Inquisition, some were the scientists that went into create the societies of Spain and Portugal, the Iberian Peninsula. If you don't understand that they were taken to the Caribbean, if you don't understand that things like cotton was introduced to the Caribbean by Africans, if you don't understand all these things, then it's very, very, very difficult to just say, oh yeah, this is what happened. Things don't happen in isolation. Right now, where Ukraine and Russia is in a war, but everyone in the world is feeling the petrol prices, but these are two neighbors fighting each other, but it's affecting everybody. All right. Thanks. Good job. Should always do our own research. You have to. Even me, don't take my word for it. This is why I don't like playing around in my documentaries. I always put books that you can read at the end of the documentaries so that you can always see. Columbus's account will give you is an eye-opener. If you can find a good version that's not biased and not rewritten. The best person who's done work on that subject, I think is Ivan Van Santima. Basil Davidson has written about 4 different volumes on different aspects of African culture. He's one of the few Europeans that got it right. He's one of the few, and he was writing in the 1950s. So, yeah. We need an interactive timeline. Yeah. Henry Louis Gates at Harvard University about 15 years ago tried to do one for slavery, the boats, like where they documented when ships left and arrived. But these are things that, the British, the French, everybody kept the log of what they were doing, but they didn't keep your name. They didn't write down, they didn't keep your ancestors' names. They just wrote, how many blacks they took on the boat. The diaspora in the Caribbean and South America, I want to do something in Jamaica, actually, with the maroon culture there. This is a good big dog. I just subscribed. All right, I'm gonna go. It's very, very late where I am, so I need to get some rest. I want to thank you all. I'm going to just let you know where you can find me. I'm finally on Instagram. Dragged me kicking and screaming. So I am not a fan of social media. So check me out. I'm on my Instagram is OnuoraAbuah, ONuoraAbuah. On Instagram, we've got the AEA films on Instagram as well. Check that out. And please share these, like these. You have to like these. I'm learning more and more that the likes are what get us to where we need to be. So please like, share, do whatever you can. And I will be back again with another piece very, very soon, hopefully around midweek or something like that. So I just want to say thank you again and peace out.